This is going to be a paint with me portrait session. Now I'm trying to keep this around 20 minutes, so I've sped up the progression time lapse just a little bit here and cut out some of the dead space to make it a little more condensed. So I'm just going to walk through the process and talk about kind of how this painting session went for me and some of the considerations. So as I always do with these, I started with kind of a middle color value and tone, just sort of a mix of umbers and reds and yellows, a little blue in there as well. Just trying to get something that's kind of in the middle of all the colors that I'm going to use on this. I thinned it down with a little bit of linseed oil just to reduce the drag against the painting surface and make it kind of more sketchy. I used to use pencil a long time ago, like when I first started painting, to try to do a pencil sketch outline. I stopped doing that within the first year, I think, and moved more towards this sort of loose outline, kind of a freehand roughing out the basic facial features using this middle color. Just because I felt like in the end result, it kind of looked better to not have pencil marks in it. And I am not the most conscientious painter. I tend to kind of make mistakes here and there and not catch them until I've finished the painting. And then usually I don't go back to paintings, or occasionally I do, but I try not to. So with these paintings, minimizing stuff that jumps out at you was pretty important to me. So getting that basic outline in, and then the next thing that I move on to is typically like I pick a street, whether it's usually it's starting with the dark. Occasionally, if I want to start with some other middle values, I do that. But in this case, I started with kind of some sort of bluish highlights, like ultramarine blue mixed with a little raw umber, just to try to bring out some of the bluish grays within the subject. And then after that, I just kind of move into whatever I see on the reference. So in this case, I believe this photo is from Unsplash. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's where I got this from, which is a royalty-free stock image site. It's one of the pretty frequent sources of reference images for me. But the reference photo, basically what I did is, as I said, I just scan your eye across it and try to find little zones of color that you're wanting to match. So that's kind of how I start these after the outline. Like the second step is to pick an area of focus. Like I said, could be the darker colors or color values. You could pick a certain hue that you're interested in. Like I mentioned, finding the bluer ones or finding the grayer colors and just start mixing them up. Kind of palette organization plays into some of this as you go around your palette. Like for me, I have a large square palette, and along the left side of the palette, I have the darker colors. So I've got blues and browns, including raw umber, burnt umber, some siennas, things like that. And then so that's the left side. And then on the right side, I've got the lighter colors like cadmium red, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, titanium white, really just all those lighter things. And then I just kind of mix them in the middle. So as I'm going around and finding these little zones, I just kind of blend them up. So the darker stuff tends to be on the left side of my palette. The lighter stuff tends to be on the right, and just progressing in the portrait in that way. Like you can see what's on the screen here as I'm painting. I've started darker, and some of the little areas are kind of redder. They have a little more cadmium red in them. Some of the areas tend more towards that yellow ochre. The blends are a little more like that. And then I just kind of work out. I find it adds a nice gradient to go kind of from middle or darker to lighter. in that way. It's not always linear, though. I don't want to make it sound like there's this extremely defined way that I do this. That's just kind of a general approach. So certainly on this painting, I followed the same general approach. And you can see just kind of bringing out those brighter areas and finding the spots. So just talking about this portrait itself a little bit, really what I was looking for when I set out to do this one, I needed something that would fit into a certain time constraint, into the time budget that I had allowed. This was originally a Friday after work project, and I felt like painting, but I knew I didn't have a ton of time before we had to start figuring out dinner and all that stuff. So I just wanted a head and shoulders portrait, which, I've tried recently, I guess within the last year and a half or so, to do more figure studies and more bigger pieces. I never paint really huge. This paper is 9 by 12 inches. Usually I don't get much bigger than 12 by 12 inches, but that 12 by 12 inch size does allow me to do more nature sceneries and background stuff within painting. So I have tried to kind of move into that a little bit more, but here it was all about doing something fast. So I was able to do that, and that's a good thing based on what I had. I think I finished it in about an hour total. As I mentioned, this time lapse, I cut out the dead pieces. When I was mixing colors, obviously my hand would be off screen then and not actually painting, so I pulled that stuff out. So anyways, getting back to the painting itself, one of the challenges that I had is what you see on screen here, the nose. So I started on a really good clip as far as having vague features and bringing them into more specific. But I ran into a hiccup in that, as you can see here, the nose, the middle part of the nose was not well aligned with the structure of the lip, and kind of where the lip bends downward in the middle. And you kind of have that little indentation sometimes above the middle of the lip that kind of corresponds to the in between the nostrils. That, I don't know if there's a name for that, but that little area. So I didn't have that very well aligned here, so I kept having to go back and adjust the positioning and adjust some of the shadows, which happens sometimes, but, well, I shouldn't say sometimes. It happens a lot, but the hope when you set out on some of these, or at least when I set out on some of these, is that I can work from vague features and just suggestions and big shapes and all that kind of stuff. I can work overall from that mode and gradually ratchet myself to more specific details, finer details. And I was able to do that with this painting for the most part, but as you can see with the nose, as I progressed through that and had to reshape it, I didn't have to take a wrecking ball to it, which does happen sometimes. Certainly there have been many occasions where I've had to, use a paper towel and just sort of wipe over a facial feature, like the nose or the mouth. Those are probably the two most common where I have to do something like that. But here I didn't have to do that. It wasn't a wrecking ball, but it certainly was a reshaping. And you can see I'm continuing to reshape in this painting. I'm having to come back and touch those features out more. And that's just part of it. I've mentioned in many of the videos that I've shared that oil paints are they're very forgiving, first of all. You can make mistakes, you can push the paint around, and you can kind of fix things. Not so with other paint types like acrylics, where it dries fast and those mistakes are there. You have to just paint over them. With oils, it's a slow dry, so you can push it around. You could almost, I've compared it to sculpting, and that's not an original thought for me. I've heard that from other people, that oil painting is similar to sculpting in that you're kind of building these features out of a big clump of clay/oil paint and molding them into the finer details. So like that's kind of what happens here. And you can see in this painting, I've almost got the facial features where they need to be. I think one of the things that I forget sometimes, as I've moved on to the hair here in the actual video, but I just want to mention, like, sometimes I forget brush technique. I kind of press too hard or try to be too direct and push. Sometimes I need to be a little lighter and just know when that, big, bold, dramatic brushstroke is needed versus kind of lightly brushing. And I made that mistake a few times here where I had probably like a really light titanium white blend or something, and rather than just sort of brushing and letting that paint kind of just apply itself onto the surface, I kind of squished the paint in, and that squishing doesn't play as well with the paint that's already there. It's like just kind of using a subtle touch, a deft touch when it's needed. I can't always do that. And I think that's probably a function of experience, my lack of experience kind of in the grand scheme of things compared to, people that have been painting all their lives or most of their lives. They more instinctively know when to push that paint, how much pressure to apply, how to use that deftness of hand. You can see here I just a second ago messed up the hair a little bit. I just, again, these things happen as you're just throwing paint around. It's almost like a black mixture on the hair that it shouldn't have been. It was not subtle. So I'm gonna have to go back and correct that later in the painting, but I just want to mention that. So also now I'm kind of getting a reddish mixture here. I'm trying to add some more red to this. I don't want to overwhelm the painting, particularly like the mouth of this subject. The lips are not extremely red. They're kind of more, it's more of a subtle transition from the skin of her like chin or other parts of the face to the lips, but it's not the same color. So you have to, that's again, I mentioned deftness of touch and some of that stuff, like the subtlety of color transitions is another thing that, if I'm in a hurry too much, I tend to sometimes destroy the subtlety that I've already laid down. And I'm doing that in a couple of places here in this painting, actually, unfortunately, where, you start blocking in at the beginning, way at the very beginning of this portrait, just blocking in those little shapes of color and different mixtures. And then later, you just have to be, because like right now I'm laying down almost a pure titanium white. I'm trying to get those highlights in. But I have to be very cautious in this step, because just laying down titanium white and just blopping it all over the place, you don't want to destroy the structure that you've already laid down. Those really nice, as I mentioned, those blends, those distinct little spots of color. I didn't destroy it here, but I do recognize as I look at the painting, the finished painting, I did eliminate some of those spots, and that's unfortunate because it does make the painting less interesting when you destroy some of those distinct little areas. So now obviously we're back into the hair here, trying to fix some of the mistakes that I mentioned before, where I laid down like almost a black. I think it was a mix of raw umber and ultramarine blue that I was using for some of the really dark spots, kind of where the hair is shadowed behind the other side of the face. I laid down some very light over that, and it still looks bad. So I'm gonna have to go back to that again. And you can see in the video now too, I've gone back to that upper, below the nose and above the mouth section. I really wasn't happy with it. I didn't get the subtlety that I was looking for, and I tried a couple of different corrective approaches. Number one, to again align it with that middle part of the nose and the indentation there above the mouth, to make that look a little more normal and natural, but also to try to add some of the subtle colors of the lip where it kind of transitions into the rest of the mouth or the face. I got that better. I still don't think it ended up being perfect. And I think, again, one of the challenges that I ran into here was not leveraging subtlety at first. I had some transitional periods there that just were too dark. I tried to use too much umber and just try to brute force some of it rather than using specialized blends that made more sense. So now I'm switching to the eyes here, trying to add some subtlety to the eyes. Eyes are really funny to me. I really like painting them because I like bringing the liveliness out of the subject. I think a lot of it comes from the eyes. And again, this is another one I keep going into the subtlety part of it, but subtlety is huge here. Like, you don't want to be extremely discreet about saying like, hey, here are the whites of the eyes, here's the dark part of the eyes, here's there's no transition between them, just here they are. So here, I'm trying to demonstrate that you have to account for subtle shifts. Same with the mouth too, like what you see here. You want suggestion. The subject's mouth is slightly open, but I don't want to just draw a tooth. You have to kind of make some subtlety with, there's the near black portion that kind of started the basis of it. It was very umber, very raw umber, then bringing that out with kind of a gray mix, a very dark gray, but titanium white, ultramarine blue, raw umber mixed together. Maybe a little on the bluer side too, maybe. Depends on how the shadows look. But getting that subtlety for the teeth. The teeth are not going to be white. The white, quote unquote, whites of the eyes are not going to be white. They're going to be probably a dark gray mostly with a little bit of lighter gray showing in certain points. So just trying to navigate that is tricky. It takes a lot of practice, I think. But practice is the key to everything. I've mentioned that in many videos too. Practice is everything. Like just giving yourself some grace and diving in, that's the key. Here, thick application. I finally, in this painting, sort of learned my lesson. I was trying to just push uphill with something that wasn't working. So I said, all right, let me make some blends here that make sense. Think of these more in chunks, because hair is like the rest of it to me, in my opinion, with oil paint. You are not painting individual hairs unless you're like a hyper-realistic artist, which obviously I'm not. You're looking for those big shapes in the hair, just like you are with all of the skin tone and all of that mixing. Big shapes. Where are they? So finally I got some of that in the hair. That was important because I was struggling a little bit, I feel like. So now another part of this is trying to figure out, is this a painting where I'm putting paint across the entire surface? The answer I determined quickly is no, I don't think so. Sometimes I decide that in the spur of the moment. I'm not much of a planner, so in terms of painting anyways, I'm not. Here I decided, I think roughly at this point in the painting, I'm not going to finish the whole thing. I don't really have time anyways. As I mentioned, this was a time constraint thing, so I just said, hey, I'm gonna touch off some of the background here, and then I'm gonna be done. And so that's what I did. So this is the painting. I appreciate you sticking with me. I hope you were able to paint along maybe. Certainly let me know if this was too fast. I don't know timing. I'm still trying to work that out. I don't want to make things that are too long. Is 30 minutes too long? Is 45 minutes too long? Probably. So maybe a 20-minute painting session is just right. I don't know. If it is, let me know. I hope this was useful or interesting or something that you could also paint. So that's all I have for this one. Thank you for joining. Hope to see you for the next one.